Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First today, Donald Trump could be coming to Britain next year, the BBC understands. Back in January, the US president accepted the Queen's invitation for him to come on a state visit. But there's since been little public discussion about the trip, leading to speculation it had been put on ice. Theresa May met the president at the G20 gathering of world leaders in Germany at the weekend, when Mr. Trump said he and the Prime Minister had developed a very special relationship. And he expected a post-Brexit trade deal to happen between the two countries very quickly. Mrs. May said that dates for his visit were still being looked at. So we now expect it to be sometime next year, and it will be a huge event when it happens. I'm joined now by the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar. So have you got a date in your diary for 2018 for this visit?
I've got 2018 in the diary, although that's in pencil, because you never quite know until these things are confirmed. Normally, you would know about a big state visit like this well in advance. It would be an absolute fixture, but you don't often see, do you, the words Donald Trump and normal in the same sentence.
No, indeed you don't. And there will be those who will think, well, it was supposed to be this summer and this autumn, and now it's been pushed back to next year. Will it happen at all? Because we know that there probably would be major protests for his visit, something he didn't want to see, and also 2 million people had signed a petition calling for his invite to be rescinded.
Well, I'd say the major protests were an absolute certainty. The visit, you'd have to call a probability. You could scarcely imagine be put off absolutely indefinitely, although who knows. The Prime Minister was, at the start, when she announced the visit back in January, very keen to keep on the right side of Donald Trump, and that remains the case. Lots of reasons for that. Major partner, but in the post-Brexit world, that relationship, and in particular a trade deal, is a very high priority. So she wants to stay on the right side of Donald Trump, and this is all part of that. But the complications, they hang in the air, don't they, along with so many complications when you're discussing this president.
And what about things like policing? What happened? You were at the G20, of course, with the world leaders. What was the reaction there? Well,
the reaction to the G20 was what you saw on the news and heard on the radio, which was running skirmishes between police and demonstrators through the entire thing. You'd hope that Donald Trump's visit, when it finally comes, won't be accompanied by precisely that kind of scene, but it will be enormously controversial. And clearly, you'd imagine a certain reticence on his part to face all of that. Although the White House denies, as you know, Joe, that that's the reason for these postponements.
Right. I mean, he's been invited. He should come.
This is diplomatic. It's nothing to do with politics. It's nothing to do with anything other than the fact that Theresa May wants to make the most of her premiership, and she needs the old alliance, the people who saved us in the Second World War, and we shouldn't forget that. Even though this man is probably the most peculiar person who's ever held that office. They've had some pretty strange and some horrible presidents, you know, kings, in fact, because they're monarchs for the period of time. I mean, people like Andrew Jackson was an absolute scumbag, you know, and you look at all the kind of things. Reagan wasn't exactly playing with a full hand. This guy almost seems to be all the worst things that you could do put into one hand.
But they have a special relationship, according to the White House, and probably to number 10.
When the UK lost America, we had a king who was losing the plot, and in many senses, the war still went on, the separation still went on. Things happen in politics sometimes with the most god-awful people, and this man is probably one of them.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the trade deal between the two of them. That is going to be absolutely crucial in terms of, I know this is going to happen after we've left the EU, signing that trade deal, but that will be part of cementing that special relationship as it's been described.
Enormous priority. Andrew Jackson, by the way, was a general and confronted the British in his time, and he was given to point his pistol at people. So we haven't heard that of Donald Trump so far. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, he was saying there would be a trade deal very, very quickly, which was exactly the kind of language that Theresa May was hoping to hear. Just how quickly, very, very quickly, what it actually adds up to, we simply don't know. These trade deals on the best day, take years and years to conclude. This will be a complicated one. It will be bilateral, not multilateral like the EU.
And he's
deal.
in favour of bilateral deals.
And of course Donald Trump is a president who, America first, that's his motto. So will it be easy for Britain? Well, you wouldn't have thought necessarily so.
Will you be one of those welcoming him when he comes next year?
I'd like to get on the plane and grab hold of him and take him someplace real rather than the golf course.
To do what? Oh, right, someplace real.
Someplace real rather than the golf course. I do think that we seem to have more and more people who are just so outside of reality, and this man takes a lot of beating.
All right, John Pienaar, thank you very much.
President Trump's eldest son has published a chain of emails about his meeting last year with a Russian lawyer who's been linked to the Kremlin. In the emails released on his Twitter feed, Donald Trump Jr. is told by a publicist that the Russian government wants to offer official documents that would incriminate Hillary Clinton and be very useful to his father's presidential campaign. Information said to be part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Well, our chief correspondent Gavin Hewitt is in Washington for us. Tell us more about these revelations then, Gavin.
Well, for 5 months, there has been a shadow hanging over the Trump administration as to whether there was collusion between the Trump election campaign and the Russians. Today, that story got a whole lot more serious. Last June, there was a meeting between Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., and a Russian lawyer. Today, we got to read the emails leading up to that meeting, and it's worth quoting. The offer was to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents that would incriminate Hillary Clinton, which would be very useful to your father. That's Donald Trump. And then it goes on. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump. And then there's an insight into what Donald Trump Jr. felt about this offer to dish the dirt on Hillary Clinton. He said, "If it's what you say, I love it."
How damaging is all this then, Gavin?
Well, of course, it is damaging. I mean, particularly that Donald Trump Jr. was prepared to go to this meeting having received these emails beforehand. It also establishes the Russian interest in influencing the American election. But I think there are some questions as to the credibility of this impresario and what were the level of his contacts in Moscow. And of course, there's an open question as to what Donald Trump himself knew. But after today, if you read these texts, I think they are devastating. And what they will do is deepen this investigation into what is really now a very serious matter for the Trump administration.
Gavin Hewitt, thank you.
Donald Trump Jr., the US president's eldest son, has released emails tonight that show correspondence between him and an intermediary discussing damaging material, apparently held by a Russian official, about his father's presidential opponent, Hillary Clinton. The email exchange has been described by one senior Democratic senator as showing the Trump campaign sought to collude with a hostile foreign power to subvert America's democracy. Kylie Morris joins us live now from Capitol Hill. Kylie.
Yes, Kathy, the big debate here now is that, the question of whether or not this is collusion. If it's not collusion, is it evidence that there might have been some inside Mr. Trump's inner circle who might have been prepared to go down that route? Or do we believe what the president is saying himself and the president's son, saying this is nothing of the sort? Certainly the story of this all-important meeting has been developing for a few days, with the president's son's explanations and defences evolving at the same time. But now he's just preempted the New York Times and tweeted out the email history of arrangements for the meeting. He's obviously very confident he can ride this out, but for the president himself, it's a damaging return to the Russia story he's trying to escape. No matter how hard the president tries to change direction, there's no getting away from this Russia scandal. Was his victory tinged by Moscow's interference? Did his campaign collude with Putin? Today, the strongest sense yet of how that might have happened, although the White House insists it never did. It's a complex story, but worth the twists and turns. And its central actor is this guy, who happens to be the son of the president, Donald Trump Jr. We ran into him on the campaign trail in Las Vegas.
He'll hear all of those people and then he'll make up his own mind.
But the genesis of today's developments date back to somewhere with even more sequence. The Miss Universe competition owned by Donald Trump, staged in Moscow back in 2013. One of the guest performers was an Azerbaijani rock star and real estate developer, Emin Agalarov.
Emin, wake up! Come on!
He and Trump became such great mates that Donald delivered a cameo in one of his pop videos.
You're just another pretty face. You're fired.
There's no oxygen. I couldn't die.
Agalarov's publicist was Rob Goldstone, who posts prolifically on social media.
I shall now act out an episode of Anti-Pat.
He once wrote for the tabloids, but is now living his best life travelling around the world.
He's coming to town.
So Goldstone is the one who, back in June last year, sends some emails to his friend Donald Trump Jr. The important bits are these. Goldstone writes, Emin's dad has met with the Crown Prosecutor of Russia, who's offering the Trump campaign sensitive, high-level information damaging to Hillary, useful to your dad. Part, he says, of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Don Jr. replies, if it's what you say, I love it. As a hint, the email subject is Russia, Clinton, private and confidential. Goldstone calls the lawyer a Russia government attorney. We know about these emails because Don Trump Jr. just tweeted them out after days of finessing his position. So what happened at the meeting? In Moscow, the lawyer was interviewed by American network NBC and asked whether she'd shared dirt on the Democratic candidate.
Знаете, может быть, у них было желание это увидеть, и они увидели из, значит, той идеи, о которой я говорила, только то, что их, может быть, интересовало. Меня интересовало другое.
At the Trump Tower meeting, it seems the lawyer wanted to talk about an adoption program Moscow froze in response to US sanctions. Which brings us to the Venn diagram of collusion, wherein sanctions on Russia and election favours for Mr. Trump trip over one another.
We have talk about sanctions relief and talk about compromising information about Donald Trump's main opponent. Now, we don't know how those ingredients were mixed together, what other elements, ingredients were included, but we know that those two things were part of the conversation and that after that, the Trump campaign did a range of things that were pro-Russian.
Russia, if you're listening.
Today, the White House denied there were any linkages to be made, declaring it much ado about nothing.
After that meeting, there was no other connection, no phone calls, no further meetings, because this individual did not meet in good faith. Donald Trump Jr. is not part of the administration, and so this is a massive nothing burger.
This, they say, is Washington's obsession, not shared by the nation. But its real consequence will be determined by the special counsel leading the investigation into whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to win the White House. Now, Don Trump Jr. obviously is at the heart of today's story, but there were others in that meeting. Paul Manafort, the campaign chair at the time, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Now, that plays into this bigger narrative where we've consistently had denials from the White House, from the vice president himself, that no advisor or Trump campaign team member had any contact with the Russians. None. Since then, Mike Flynn's had to resign. Jeff Sessions has had to recuse himself because of Russian meetings. So what happens next? I mean, certainly Don Trump Jr. is feeling fairly confident. The fact that he's been putting out his own emails reflects that, I think. But certainly there are some in the Senate Intelligence Committee who say that they have questions for him. He needs to give answers. And through his lawyer, he's said that he will be happy to answer them.
Kylie, thank you very much.
Washington is abuzz tonight. Donald Trump's foes scent blood. The issue, once again, is claimed collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The president and those around him have repeatedly denied knowledge of any alleged attempt by Moscow to swing last autumn's election. But today, Donald Trump's son, Donald Jr., was forced to release a string of emails suggesting he knowingly met last summer with Russian officials who promised to dish the dirt on Hillary Clinton. Today, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, Mrs. Clinton's running mate, said, in terms of what's being investigated, this is moving into perjury, false statements and even potentially treason. A former Watergate prosecutor described the emails as a smoking cannon. The president, meanwhile, defended his son as a high-quality person committed to transparency.
They only actually met last week, but the exact relationship between President Trump and his Russian counterpart is a constant theme among critics. There were plenty of allegations, but not much fact. Well, now details of a meeting between members of the Trump campaign and a Russian lawyer have changed that. The picture is rapidly evolving, the president's son having to shift his position repeatedly in the past 3 days. And the publication of fresh details of the meeting in June last year by the New York Times prompted the president's eldest son to release what he said was the entire email chain. On the 3rd of June, Rod Goldstein, a British publicist acting for Russian clients, told Mr. Trump Jr. he could introduce him to someone who'd been briefed by the Russian authorities, who
offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously high-level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support of Mr. Trump.
The tycoon's son replied within minutes, saying,
"If it's what you say, I love it."
Later on the 7th of June, a date having been set for the meeting, Mr. Goldstein referred to the person who was coming over as
the Russian government attorney who is flying over from Moscow.
Donald Trump Jr. replied that the meeting would take place at Trump Tower in New York.
"Great. It will likely be Paul Manafort, campaign boss, my brother-in-law and me."
In releasing the emails, Donald Trump Jr. wrote that he was being totally transparent and reiterated that the Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya,
had no information to provide and wanted to talk about adoption policy and the Magnitsky Act.
Earlier today, the lawyer insisted that she was never in possession of information that could have damaged Hillary Clinton, but that Trump's people definitely wanted it.
It's quite possible that maybe they were looking for such information. They wanted it so badly.
Rob Goldstein has previously told the New York Times the meeting produced no new information. He's also clarified that the lawyer was not a Kremlin official. And the president's legal team have said that he was not aware and did not attend the June meeting. But the email publication raises questions about the various shifts in Donald Trump Jr.'s position on the meeting, from initially denying it had anything to do with the Hillary Clinton campaign.
The BBC's Paul Wood has been investigating President Trump's alleged links with Russia since last summer and joins us now from Washington. Paul, you've come in on a day you were moving house, I think, so I assume you think this is serious.
Well, you couldn't miss this one. I think there have been many bad days for the Trump administration on Russia. This is the worst for them. This is the most serious. Let's go back to first principles here. The US intelligence agencies all say that Russia interfered in the US presidential election and did so to get Mr. Trump elected. Now, the White House has always denied that narrative. I was having lunch with a senior aide to President Trump the other day, and he said that he thought this was a politically motivated charge by people at the top of those agencies with whom Mr. Trump has been in open warfare, taking scraps of information and pushing them out and putting a political slant on them. I think it's going to be very difficult for the White House to keep to this line now that we have Donald Trump Jr. accepting a meeting on the basis that it is the Russian government trying to hand over information. Now, there's a huge investigation going on under a special counsel, hundreds of FBI agents, all looking at whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian intelligence services, specifically, according to members of the Obama administration anyway, who've seen the intelligence. It's alleged that members of the Trump campaign directed the Russians which Democratic Party politicians to hack and then coordinated the leaking of whatever damaging information resulted. Well, looking at these email exchanges from Donald Trump Jr. published today, that meeting was not about this. It was not about telling the Russians where to hack. He was being offered official Russian information, damaging to Hillary Clinton allegedly, but it was not the result of illegal actions on US soil, at least according to those emails. Now, that may not help him very much, not least because if you cast your mind back to the Christopher Steele dossier, Christopher Steele, the former MI6 man who set this hair running with his reports, He said there had been an 8-year exchange of information between Russian intelligence and the Trump campaign, and this meeting certainly fits into that picture. As one witty network anchor put it earlier today, if Donald Trump Jr. was not colluding, then he was certainly collusion curious.
Paul, you've given some hint about your contacts with people from the administration, and we've seen a tweet from the president more or less saying, oh, who wouldn't be interested in information about the opposition? I mean, is that the sort of line they're going to take? What is their strategy going to be to deal with this?
I think they're in a panic at the moment. It was very telling that once again the White House press briefing was not on camera, and the spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders basically said, talk to the lawyers, whenever she was asked a question. Very telling too that Donald Trump Jr. changed his story. Initially his explanation was he was just meeting about Russian orphans being adopted by American parents, and only when the New York Times had all the emails did he, in what his father calls an act of transparency, actually go public. I think you'll see the White House falling back on what I call the naivete defense. We've heard this from White House officials and their supporters in Congress that, well, we weren't really involved in politics before, didn't really know what we were getting into, our intentions are good, we didn't realise we were breaking the law. That's a defence that was trotted out when Jared Kushner failed to mention a meeting with the Russian ambassador in his official forms. So whether that actually works remains to be seen. There is this investigation going on. There's probably a lot more to come out. Having spoken to 3 separate intelligence sources who've seen all the classified intercepts, they say there is no single conversation which speaks of a conspiracy. What there is a number of suspicious contacts. Just the number of them are suspicious. And I think that's what this investigation will now be looking at. And you can bet if the New York Times has this transcript, the intelligence services have many more of these. And this is the worst day so far, but I think there are going to be a lot more bad days on Russia for the Trump administration to come.
Paul, thank you very much. You better get back to your moving. Well, Michael Wolff is a leading American author who's writing a book about President Trump's White House and has been an excoriating critic of the liberal media. I spoke to him earlier and asked what he makes of the latest chapter in the Trump-Russia saga.
This is a real one. This is, we now have evidence, and let's be very precise about what we do now know. We now know that the Russian government reached out to embrace the Trump campaign, and that the Trump campaign was very willing to be embraced by the Russian government. Now, there's no crime there that we know of yet. But we certainly are a big step forward to the circumstance in which there could be collusion in the commission of a crime. And that's important because just to establish collusion, as the Trump people are desperately saying today, is not a crime.
But what about the electoral law, soliciting a foreign contribution, that type of thing? Does that not put Donald Trump Jr. into difficult legal waters?
I think that's a kind of a sideshow at this point. One of the other aspects of this is going on is the media response to this, which is a paroxysm of glee and delight and I told you so and game over. Now the media has gone through this paroxysm many times before. And they've been, if the media has done anything on this story, it's gotten way out ahead of where the story really is. This has taken a clear step forward, but it is by no means where the media thinks it is or thinks it should be.
There have obviously been people who've got carried away. We know Mr. Trump has plenty of enemies in the liberal media, but you yourself, as someone with very good...
I would like to say, well, I'd like to clarify that. Everyone in the liberal media is a Trump enemy.
Okay, well, wouldn't you say, though, and I think you have been saying in your answers so far, that this is real? Of course, it's not been judged by a court yet. There hasn't been a real legal thrashing out of this issue, but it's important.
Well, no.
Quantitatively different.
You've just taken a major leap beyond what we know. It's not a question of a court. There's no. You could not at this point say what crime might have been committed here. I mean, it looks terrible. I mean, they associate with really a lot of dubious characters. It is Russia, after all. I mean, the story could not appear worse. But there is yet no nexus in which anyone can establish a crime.
So, Michael,
I mean, just taking dirt from the Russians on Hillary Clinton is not a crime.
Well, it's a benefit potentially, isn't it, under the electoral law? But let's park that for a moment.
No. You got somebody slipped you a little Mickey here. This is not. Forget the electoral laws. It's not relevant. You bad research on this.
You have good lines into the Trump White House. You have good access there. How obsessed do you think the president has become with this issue? We heard these reports at the time of the Comey dismissal of him saying to the Russians, "Oh, I got rid of the problem," that this seems to be an issue that has bedeviled him.
I mean, I think there's no question about this. The president this is top of mind for the president. It's top of mind for everyone in the White House. They have taken structural steps to deal with this, I mean, in very serious ways. I mean, they've modeled their response after the ways the Clintons handled Monica Lewinsky, which resulted in the president's impeachment, by the way. This is central to what is going on in the White House right now.
Michael Wolff, thank you so much. So where does this go from here? Mark Mazzetti is the Washington investigations editor of the New York Times, a paper which has done much of the running on this story. He's been overseeing their extensive investigations into Donald Trump's links to Russia, and he joins us now from Washington, D.C. Mark, can I just start off by asking you, doesn't this meeting in June 2016 and the fact that these people in Trump Tower seemed so keen to take it suggest there was no pipeline or formal connection with the Russians up to this point?
I mean, I wouldn't draw any conclusions necessarily either way. I mean, certainly there were contacts, there was a relationship going back several years between Donald Trump Jr. and Emin Agalarov and the father, who was associated with Donald Trump's Miss Universe pageant in 2013. I would be careful, and I would caution everyone else to not draw direct conclusions either way about this meeting, and to be sort of not go beyond where the facts are. We know that based on the reporting of the last several days, that this meeting was brokered because Donald Trump Jr. believed that the Russian government had damaging information about Hillary Clinton and was very eager to take the meeting. We're still trying to figure out what became of that, if anything, what information was discussed. So I think it's a significant development in that we now have details about a specific meeting, but there's a lot more work to be done to put pieces together either way.
Where does it take us in terms of that familiar Trump allegation that Trump Tower was bugged? I mean, just in terms of potential incidental collection by US intelligence agencies that may have brought these emails, I beg your pardon, to light. Does that suggest there was incidental collection in this case?
No, not at all. I mean, the emails, it doesn't suggest that no one has alleged that these emails were intercepted by U.S. intelligence agencies or American law enforcement or anything like that. So no, there's been no, there's no.
Are you saying they weren't?
To suggest at all.
Are you saying they weren't?
I'm saying that there is. I'm saying that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to suggest that, and it'll come out eventually, the whole story on this. But certainly nothing that has been reported thus far suggests that there was any involvement of American intelligence agencies.
Where do you take your investigation next? What are you hunting for in terms of connections and communications between these key individuals?
I mean, it's a lot of it is where the same questions remain. Was there any concerted effort between the Trump campaign and the Russian government to share information, to coordinate on message, to somehow actively try to help Donald Trump? We saw from this meeting that there at least was interest on the part of the Trump campaign. It does not show that there was a active campaign of collusion or really that there was any direct evidence that there were actions taken that had any impact. So, there are still questions about the president, there are still questions about some of his advisors, and a lot of suspicious contacts that I think still need to be run to ground.
Clearly, we will watch the pages of your paper and await your next instalment. Thank you very much, Mark Mazzetti.
Thank you.
I've been